Welcome to the MBN Solutions Boss and Data podcast. This episode, our topic is Data Creates Business. Data has played a transformative role in the creation of the modern business landscape. The dynamic interplay between data, business strategy, and the commercialisation of data assets has assisted in the creation of some of the largest and most profitable businesses on the planet. Today's businesses in any sector must seek to understand how to harness data to drive innovation and unlock new revenue streams, how a data strategy should exist symbiotically with a business strategy, and how to navigate the undoubted challenges, including ethical considerations that underpin responsible data commercialisation. None of this is easy, but all of this can be learned. Joining me today to discuss the topic in more detail is a data leader who has spent more than 20 years opening up new revenue streams for firms like Go Compare, the Royal Mint, Jaguar Land Rover, Shell, British Telecom and Lloyds Banking Group. He is currently a sitting non-executive director at Bath Building Society, the Football Association for Wales, Glamorgan Cricket Club and Principality Stadium. He was recognised by Data IQ as one of the UK's top 100 data leaders and influencers in 2020 and 2021, by Corinium Global as a global top 100 data innovator in 2022, was a finalist in 2023 for UK Data Leader of the Year at the British Data Awards, and was recently awarded the title of Technology Leader of the Year at the Technology Connected Awards for Wales. His purpose is to get data into the boardroom for organisations so that most decisions are backed by data at the highest level. His mission is to make data a first-class citizen within organisations and to have it as a must-have skill, especially on SME boards. Welcome to the show, Sameer Rahman.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Robin. Good to speak to you.
Absolutely delighted that you've joined me, Sameer. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, and thanks for giving up some of your very valuable time. And obviously, the first question, sir, is where in the world are you joining me from today?
Well, I'm in Cardiff. I live in the capital of Wales. I've lived in Cardiff for 20 years. It's been my home. So
Brilliant. And the weather here, I'm in West Central Scotland, kind of halfway between Glasgow and Edinburgh, and the weather here is appalling. How are you doing down there? It looks a bit nicer where you are.
It really has been better, and no rain today, so can't complain.
That just doesn't happen where I live. There's always rain. It's just whether you get it at the beginning of the day or later on. Okay, Sameer, thank you so much for agreeing to join me today. Now, you and I have known each other for what seems like forever, but for the benefit of the audience, can you tell us your story? Where do you come from, your journey in data? Where are you now?
So interesting, Robin. I think data is kind of a newish area, and everybody is coming from data from a different stream. I think for me, I did my computer science engineering, but I still didn't land up in data. I went into business management and did my master's of business. And when I was doing my dissertation on Tesco Club Card, basically how did Tesco change the operating model through the application of data, I think that is where the penny dropped for me. That is where I thought, so this is where business meets data, and this is where data can change businesses. And from then on, I think I said, this is where I'm going to make my career. The word data science wasn't coined. This is 21 years ago. So from then on, obviously, the first role I had was what it was in HMRC, which was more of a credit tax officer role, but still had some mathematical calculations to be done. So still had some data elements. And then Lloyds, and then HBOS, different analytical roles in different capacities. So the career just built up. As it happens in most careers for most people, you plan something else, or you don't plan at all, and it falls upon you. But I think really, if I were to choose one moment or one kind of incident, then that would be the penny drop moment when I was doing my dissertation. That is where it made me realize the importance of data in creating businesses, which is the topic for today.
I think it would be interesting if we took a straw poll of data leaders, how many people had been influenced by that original Dunnhumby case study. Because I know from my own perspective, and way back 20 odd years ago when I first started being involved in the talent for the industry, EMEA and Dunnhumby were two organisations behind loyalty cards that were massively influential. Right. So many people passed through those organisations. Great stuff. Okay, so moving on to the subject of today's conversation, this idea around data creating business. How do you see the role of data evolving in the modern business model, particularly in terms of creating new revenue streams and driving growth?
Yeah. Well, I think, look, I mean, we've had this chat. I think data has become a fundamental ingredient. There are maturity cycles of data. Data was initially said to be a utility, then it became an enabler,
Yep.
which it still is a utility and an enabler. And then the thing I am quite sort of excited about is it then became well, the old saying, data is a new oil, but nobody knows how to use that oil to make money.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And this is where the monetization, so the third maturity cycle is monetization. And the fourth maturity cycle is data does create business. So there's four maturity cycles, I think, from my experience, data has gone through. It's gone through from Mr. and Mrs. Nowhere to
Mhm.
Mr. and Mrs. Utility to enabler to monetization and commercialization to creating businesses. And the example of the fourth creating businesses that we can give is, if I ask the question, do you know how much of revenue of Amazon comes from, or Netflix, for example, comes from its recommendation, which is based on the data that we give to Netflix? People say it could be 10%, 20%, but actually the figure is 80%. So
Wow.
80% of Netflix revenue, 80% of the content that we watch comes from their recommendation engine, the personalization of, and that is built of our behavior of what we are watching. So that is where data creates businesses. If you take that data out of Netflix, Netflix simply won't exist in the shape and form that we know now. So it's been my fundamental kind of speak and cheerleading, saying data is no longer just a utility, just an enabler. Yes, you can commercialize, monetize it. Obviously, that is one of the key important factors and improves the society. But really, you can now create businesses out of it. And you don't realize it, but actually, businesses are created by data.
Interesting. Observation I would make here, perhaps in terms of a supplementary, you
Mm-hmm.
operate at the very highest level
Mm-hmm.
with organisations across the board. I totally recognise those 5 or 6 iterations of the maturity cycle, but how much of those latter iterations, 5 and 6, are dependent upon good data literacy, a solid foundation of the data estate within the organisation, and is that impeding some organisations?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think, first of all, you have to have the vision of how to commercialize, monetize, and build businesses from data. So first thing is you need to have data leadership, or your CEO, the kind of the leader in the company, really cheerleading, understanding, driving that data literacy culture. So that's absolutely fundamental. It won't happen without that, because no matter how many use cases, business justifications, business cases you give, the CEO has to believe in it, and he has to sign up to it, and he has to be behind it, not just he has to walk the talk. In terms of culture and data literacy, absolutely important. You will get nowhere, even you've got it's the old saying, ideas are cheap, execution is difficult.
Yeah.
And execution happens when all of the things that you said, Robin, when you've got the right culture, when people are data literate, when your middle management, which is very important part of this, although it sounds like it's very strategic, but actually your middle management, who are the
Yeah.
people who will support you in that, they have to be fundamentally behind it, understand it, fully into it. Then they will rally their team, which we come back to the operational, the analysts of this world, the data scientist. They then get the vision, they then get the support from the middle management, and then it builds up. The infrastructure, as we all say, the processes, the technology and the tooling, the quality of data, the platform, all of that come into. So Netflix wasn't born in a day, for
Yep.
example. Amazon wasn't born in a day. They iterated and iterated and iterated. And for example, Netflix, it took them 7 or 8 years to understand the value of data, and then to set up the platform and set up the business model, it took another 3 or 4 years. So it's a 5 to 10 year journey of realization, but it does involve the whole organization led by the CEO and with a very important data leader as their right hand man or woman.
Perfect. Okay. So on that topic then, could you provide some examples of successful data monetization strategies that have been implemented by businesses in various industries? And we've obviously got the example there of Netflix and Amazon. What key factor contributed to their success?
So I think let me give you another very interesting example, which is of Uber. So these are all the companies. I mean, I'm not talking about big companies. I'm talking about big companies just to make people realize that if they can do it, smaller companies can do it even quite nimbly.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at Uber, Uber's current business model is dependent on just one piece of data. And if I ask you what that data is, that's Google Maps data. So
Right.
it's not even the data that Uber owns. So Uber's model is built on Google Maps data. From the last one, they don't get their financials out in the open. From the last one I heard in 2019, they paid something like 58 million just to buy that data set. Okay, so we give Google data of where we are going.
Yep.
Google sells that data to Uber. Uber builds a business based on that data, and obviously we all know we all know the cycle. So what is involved in that is first a vision saying, okay, so I will have a rental model of driving people to places. What does that rental model entail? That entails a technology app or real-time data that involves a data which tells me where the driver is, where the people who are looking to take a lift is, and that's all dependent on. So it's not overly complicated. It's not. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm making it simple. It is not as simple as I'm making it, but it's not hundreds of varieties of data coming together for you to go from destination A to destination B. It's just one piece of data, and it's a simple app. So again, the point I'm trying to make is people overcomplicate sometimes. And yes, some part of it is complicated. You need scale, you need the right platform, you need the platform to get the dynamism of the data, real-time data into the platform. But with the current technology and tooling infrastructure, it's not overly complicated, it's not overly expensive, it doesn't take you a lot to scale that. So it's just the point I want to try to make to the viewers and the listeners today is really you don't realize how not easy, but it's not as complicated as you think in terms of look at the data sets that you have got, and you can truly make businesses and commercialization out of limited data sets. You don't have to have high velocity, high variety, high volume. All of that is a myth, I think.
It's a really interesting point, and I had a conversation with another chap, an episode that will be out there probably pretty soon with a chap by the name of Colin Parry, and we discussed this about overcomplication and how things could be made far more simple, but very effective for the modern business. Thank you, great answer. You mentioned that CEO and the data leader, male or female, that effectively acted as the right-hand person. In your experience, how crucial is it for businesses to align their data strategy with the overall business strategy? And can you share some insights on how businesses effectively integrate data into strategic decision-making processes?
Yeah, I mean, look, absolutely. So first of all, I think a data leader today is really, they should be the commercial leader. They should be the commercial business leader first, looking things from a data lens. So when you define a CDO to me, I won't say a CDO is I would say CDO is a data leader on paper, but really what their attitude to working within a business should be. I am a data and a commercial leader. I just see things from a data lens. That will be my definition. In line with that, the first thing a CDO or a CIO or any title for that matter, a data leader should do and has to do is look at their business strategy, look at their organizational vision, purpose, mission from a plain sheet of paper, and then work backwards from that, saying, okay, so which part of my organizational strategy can be supported by data? And then you work even backwards, saying, okay, so then what are the relevant use cases? And then what is the relevant skill? What is the relevant process? What is the relevant technology? What is the relevant data? So you work backwards from that. I think one of the very good examples of this, Robin, is the Swedish buy now pay buy later pay now buy now pay later retailer called Klarna.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Klarna was born right after the financial crisis of 2007. So basically, and it was born. It was a very good example. The business strategy was to give people the ability to buy stuff and pay later, which the banks almost always did. But what Klarna did was it looked at the data and said, okay, so people can't afford high-end items because they are cash strapped. Again, the financial crisis, we all know what impact it had. On the other hand, when it looked at the survey data, it said, oh, people still want to give them cheap treats and instant gratification and buy things for, I want to buy a 20-pound toy for my kid, or I want to have an expensive, it's not expensive, but a chocolate for myself and that kind of stuff. They just didn't have the money themselves. But if you get for small stuff, if you extend the payment to 2 or 3 weeks or months, then they'll be able to afford it. So, but on the other hand, it's the third piece of data. What banks had the risk underwriting criteria was getting difficult and difficult because of the credit. And if you go into the risk underwriting criteria, it won't be dynamic. So if you're buying something on Amazon, it won't be dynamic enough. It will probably give you an answer 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, and you might have left the website.
Yeah.
So its business strategy was based where my purpose is to enable people to buy what they want to buy at an affordable luxury. So that's what it did, and it went up with a proposition which banks didn't have, which is initially it was you can buy up to £100 without the credit risk underwriting. But you'll have to give me the account kind of log into Amazon account. So I know who you are. So you have to give me the data and I'll take the risk of the credit risk underwriting. And hence the business model was born. Banks didn't cater to it. Nobody catered to it. So there's a market gap. There's a consumer need. And there was a credit risk underwriting sort of crisis. So it took advantage of all that to create a business. So this is where it's basically its data strategy completely aligned with its business mission and purpose of the business model that it wanted to develop. And these are the small examples that we can take. It's only 3 pieces of data: consumer survey, market data around the credit risk industry, and the gaps that banks wouldn't cater, intelligence that banks would never cater to that market. They still don't. Whether it's ethical or not, that's another question. I mean, some people might think it's not ethical and stuff like that. But that's beyond the point. It might not be ethical. I'm not promoting Klarna. I'm just giving an example of how business strategy and data strategy just come together. And you can't differentiate the two. It is part of the same thing.
Yep. On and just a supplementary on that one, particularly looking at strategic decision-making processes and with reference to, which I think is a great phrase, hippo decision-making.
Yeah.
Do you find in your work that it can sometimes be a challenge because what you're bringing in is science, it's fact, it's very evidence-based and focused, whereas we've always done it this way because this is what we think we should do. It has been the way that a lot of businesses have always run. How much do you find that you've got to win over the hearts and minds in the room very early in the process in order to get that strategic decision-making aligned?
Very good question. I think the hippo approach is still prevalent. Obviously, it's various organizations. I mean, depends on the leader, but the leader has to be very data literate. So the one thing I will say in my experience is you have to establish your credibility as a data leader. You can't go in to the CEO in the boardroom and to the board and say, I want to do this big, massive thing. Give me £100 million of investment. You just can't do that. You have to prove yourself. You have to prove that they can trust you and you are credible enough. In order to prove yourself, and this is where the idea of whether you call it quick win or a particular use case.
Yeah.
So get to a pain point within the business, which you think can be solved, not quickly, but which can be solved through the application of data in a reasonable amount of time. Do that first. So identify that first. What's one of the pain points? How can you solve it? Can you prove yourself that you've done that and you've illustrated your worth to the organization?
Yeah.
Once you do that, you earn the trust of the CEO and the board. And then you slowly get into that, okay, now I can fundamentally change the business model through the application of data. But going back to my original point, Robin, it does mean that the CEO has to be very data literate. They have to be
Yeah.
very switched on. They have to be completely behind the cause. The hippo approach you see normally are still in companies where the CEO hasn't come from a data background, or they just completely believe their instinct, which is not a bad thing, by the way. I've written one of the articles, and I've said in that article two things. One is data is always a decision support tool, and it's not a
Yeah.
decision maker 100% of the time.
Yes, it augments
This
decision making rather than replaces.
Absolutely. And the second thing, based on that, is consider the experience of the CEO and the board and the executive team as a data point. You
Yes.
can't ignore that, because that is a crucial data point. So, based on those two, I think there should be a balance between data telling something, the CEO's gut telling something, somebody else's experience. Let's mix it all together, put it in the boiler, triangulate all that, and see where we end up with.
Great answer. I really like that. I really like that. So, moving on to some of the challenges then. What challenges do businesses commonly face when they begin to commercialise their data assets? And what strategies could they employ to overcome those challenges?
I think the biggest challenge is they don't know what they don't know, how the data
Yeah.
can be commercialized. Again, let's give an example of big organizations, Google and Facebook, right? So Google, one of the biggest organizations on earth, it did not have a business model, a commercial business model, until 2002, 2003, when it started bidding and AdWords came into. So it's just
Right.
a vision. I mean, nobody realized Google was big. Everybody searched on Google. Everybody knew Google, but it didn't have a commercial model. It wasn't
Right.
profitable. It just didn't know how to make money. And it was AdWords bidding on our search that we gave to Google that became its commercial vehicle. Facebook, same example. Facebook started its advertising in 2007, and you will be amazed that 98% of Facebook's revenue comes from advertising. It has got no other commercial model even
Right.
yet. 80% of Google's, well, 78% to be precise, 78% of Google's money comes from its bidding. So I think first of all is having that vision of how do you commercialize that data? How do you use that? How do you make it money? How do you make money out of that? And what is the best way of monetizing it? Which is where, again, you need a very highly data literate CEO, a good
Yeah.
board, switched
Yeah.
on, and supported by a very able data leader to say, this is how we can make money. And you will not get it right first time. There will be multiple iterations, there'll be multiple failures on the way. There's a lot of success stories, but there's more failure stories in there. So you have to be persistent, you have to persevere, you have to believe. So that's the strategic aspect. In terms of what other aspects, obviously the whole kind of data strategy puzzle comes in together. Obviously, you'll have to have good process.
Mhm.
Process is often underrated in terms of people talk about, I'll have a fancy new tooling, it'll solve all my problem, or I'll hire sort of star performers that has worked with me in the past that will solve all my problems. But fundamentally, your process has been built around a flawed model in the past. And what you're doing is fitting new tool and new people in that process, which is still fundamentally flawed.
Flawed. Yep. Yep.
So first thing you have to fix is that process. So work backwards from business strategy to data strategy to use cases and see, does the process support that? If it doesn't, the first thing you have to do is not a tool, not a technology. As a data leader, you have to work on fixing that process along with the executive team.
Wow. Well, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And again, bringing back to that idea that without the fundamentals in place, you can go and employ those rock stars. You can go and come up
Yeah.
with fancy tooling, but without the fundamentals in place, it's unlikely to achieve the objective that
Yeah,
you've
and
set
we've
out to
all
do.
seen that, haven't we,
Yeah.
Robin, in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
getting new tools didn't work and getting new people didn't work and then blaming the tools and the people for that.
So is that so the work that you do now is very, very specialist work, and is this part and parcel of the early stage discovery that you would have with an organisation would be looking right across the vista at process, technology, literacy, leadership, middle management? Is that you scan the entire landscape and make recommendations based on what you see?
Yeah. I think, look, data literacy and data culture are the first thing that you find out from all these things. So, some of the things I normally look at is there a particular use case that is built on data in the last 5 years? So, what are the major decisions that the company has taken in the last 3, 5, depends on the context of the company, and what has been the importance of what has been the business case of that, and how important data is in that business case. Point one. Point two, I would look at is when they've got an annual statement or an annual report. What are they looking at, and what is the future view of the CEO and the chairman in that annual report, and how fundamental a part data is playing in that? That's quite crucial to me, because that gives you a culture and an aspect of, okay, so how mature the organization is, whether they're even thinking about it, whether they've deployed it, whether they're trying to do something with it. So that is the first kind of port of call for me, saying, give me all this, let me suss out what the culture and the literacy is. I mean, I do look at the backgrounds of the executive team and the CEO, saying what is their background, how have they come through, which gives, again, not to kind of spy on anybody, but it gives me an idea of how to speak to them. If they come from a very financial background, then you would talk about things like data helping them in commercial forecasting, pricing, that kind of thing, and that resonates with them straight away. If they come from a very marketing background, then you will talk about econometrics modeling, very much marketing optimization, customer experience, and again, that will resonate with them. So all that, it's due diligence of people you're talking to, due diligence of the organizational assets, which is the accounting, the annual statement. And again, you look at annuals during AGMs. What is the CEO and the chair saying? Are they talking about in how reliant are they on data and things like that? So I would look at that, and obviously as part of data strategy, then the points you made, Robin, I would definitely look at the process. I would definitely look at the data, including the quality of data, the engineering practices, and all that. I would look at the architecture, how data flows through the organization. The technology and tooling becomes part of that. And then I look at, finally, I'll obviously look at kind of what role data plays in different functions. Is it just restricted to marketing? Is it just playing a part in operations? Or is it fundamentally universal across the organization? That gives, again, an idea of the culture. Is it, if the culture drives it, then you will see a more universal adoption rather than a functional adoption.
Now, you spoke earlier on about that maturity cycle again, and where data has appeared, sometimes intangibly within an organisation's landscape, and whether it's where it sits on the P&L, if you like. How do you recommend businesses assess the value of their data assets, especially considering the intangible nature of data? Are there specific metrics or methodologies that you would use, you find particularly effective in this evaluation process?
Look, this is a very interesting question, and this is a question with a lot of organizations are grappling with, and I think will continue to grapple with. So I've got my own kind of thoughts on this. First point I would like to make is data today is where brand was 20 years ago. Okay, so we all still know brand is absolutely important and all that. Various studies have been, but nobody knows how to properly value the brand. Yes, there are brand equity valuations and things like that, but if you still develop a Tesla, and if you take Tesla out of Tesla, for what price will it sell? What's the marker between, will Tesla sell for 70,000 while the same car without the Tesla brand on it sell for £30,000? So is that 40,000 gap becomes your brand valuation? I think the same approach I'll take with data. There are various models of valuing data. One model, which I absolutely don't agree with, but that is a model anyway, is the risk and the cost based model, which is really, if you take the data, if you lose all the data that you've got, how much cost will you have to give to get all that data back? So if Amazon has got, I don't know, making this up, 10,000 subscribers in a year, if it loses 10 million subscribers, if it loses 10 million data, obviously, apart from the regulation and whatnot, if it loses that data, what is the cost of getting that data back?
Yep.
So that's the cost model of valuation. This is the simplest model, although I do not recommend it because it's quite restrictive, because it doesn't take into account the economic impact. So the second model is really the market valuation model, which is how much does if you're going to sell your business, how much does the market value your business based on the data that you have? So this is the typical, let's say, Experian. Another
Yes.
example, they capture all the open data, they do all the surveys and capture data from other sources, blend it all, produce an insight, their own segmentation, and sell that data, and really make a business out of that. If you value Experian, and if you take all the data out, probably the value of Experian will be zero. So really, you would say that the market valuation of Experian is based on all the data that it collects. So that's second way of doing it. The third way, which I have found more useful and more practical, and basically it can be universal across most companies, is use case based economic impact. So, for example, you take in and say for marketing, okay, I've employed my data within this marketing process. So the marketing ROI was whatever, let's say 2 times. For every pound you spend, you get 2 times the return. Then you apply all your data strategic work within marketing, embedded within the marketing optimization processes, improve customer experience through the use of data. And then you look at the ROI, and that might have gone from £2 to, let's say, £3, £4. So that incremental impact is the use case based effect of data. And I find it quite useful. I mean, there has been various studies saying you have to have the overall valuation of data at the very top. Firstly, it's very difficult to get to. Secondly, it's just you need an army of people. Probably you'll have to outsource it because you don't have that kind of capacity to look at the whole operations. So I think one step at a time, saying, okay, data for marketing purposes is valued at that. Data for financial purposes, it improves your forecasting or it improves your pricing. And because of pricing, you get X more business. I think my approach is bottom up, having various fundamental use cases across different functions, tree them up to say, okay, so as an estimate, your value of data is XYZ. The fourth thing I will add, Robin, in this current climate, which I have only come to realize after COVID, is the societal impact of data. So really, we talk about the valuation in commercial terms and stuff like that. There's a huge societal impact. Data can save lives. Data has saved lives, which we've seen all through COVID. Probably it could have saved more lives, but it's a case of look at all that and look at people who are dying because they hadn't got the treatment. And obviously detecting illnesses going forwards and stuff like that. It's all around how you see the data and how you analyze the data. So I think the four, summarizing it, the cost valuation one, cost methodology, valuation two, market methodology, valuation three, use case based economic impact methodology, valuation four, if you are in a societal impact kind of scenario, then societal impact methodology. Those will be the four I would probably. My favorite will be number three.
And it's interesting that in that fourth model there you mentioned for the common good, but obviously for the common good we'll introduce a little bit more around the ethical considerations that we should be thinking about as we use that data. So what are some of those ethical considerations that businesses should always keep in mind when they begin the process of commercialising their data asset? How can businesses ensure that they leverage that data responsibly while still maximising any commercial potential that's there?
Yeah, I think, look, the ethical considerations are a very big part. So the right kind of, we talk about data governance and privacy by design. That is kind of data governance is not an area. It's an area whenever you talk about data, governance should intrinsically be embedded within everything that you do, which means you need to have the right permissions. Are you asking the permission for the right stuff? Because we have seen companies where say, yeah, I've got the permission, that's fine, I can do whatever with that data. But obviously, the Data Protection Act and the GDPR is about you have to use the data in the context that you've asked. So if you've asked
Yes.
for a particular promotion to get into a prize draw, that's it. You can't use the data after that. So organizations have hidden behind that permission management for long. So I think privacy and data governance by design is I will stick to my ethical roots and I'll say I will not use your data after that, or if I want to, I'll ask you for a permission again. I think one of the things I have seen slightly related to this is also the bias, because that introduces the ethical consideration. So one of the studies we were doing with a healthcare provider recently was looking at the algorithm bias, not just data bias. So we've talked about data ethical. Now, if bring the data forward, there's an algorithm bias. And this was an example where detection of cancers was done in people with ethnic Indian origin, like myself, really. And it's a case of, okay, so the whole algorithm is built on, because the sample was built on a typical British male or female who has got a very different genetic profile. So the
Yes.
algorithm was built to detect early
Yes.
cancers.
Yes.
But when you do the same with an Asian person or a non-British with a different genetic setup, then the algorithm cannot pick up the cancers, which means you're losing you're losing lives because of that bias.
It's fun. I saw a post on LinkedIn yesterday. A chap who I don't know, but we interacted, and he had discovered that he had prostate cancer. And he
Right.
put a post out. He discovered early that he had it. He was undergoing treatment, but he was putting out a little warning to men of my age, and I presume you're similar age to me, Sameer. And one of the things he said was it's more likely to be prevalent in, and I think the way he just described it was in dudes from a black background. Black dudes were more likely to get it than white people. So if you
Yeah.
had incidents of it in your house already, or incidents of
Yeah.
it in
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
family, and you were of a certain ethnic background, please go and get this checked. And that got me thinking to exactly your point there. If the sample size has been from one section of the population,
Yeah. It's not representative.
it's not
It's
representative.
not
Yeah,
representative of the
that's the
society that we
bias.
live in today.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay. Wow. And this opens up I suppose, a whole different consideration around, to your point earlier, and it's actually one of the next questions. To your point earlier about that societal good, yes, it may well be that the data can be utilised for not so much a commercial gain, but for a societal gain. But
Hmm.
in doing that, we have to look at society holistically.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it completely negates
Absolutely.
the potential gain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it completely does. I think it goes back to that the bias and the fundamental kind of what are you feeding in? Is it representative of the society that we live in? Is will it cater to every section of the population that you
Yeah.
want it to, and things like that? Even to the point of, okay, there are a lot of minority, there might be minority section of the society. You really data can't ignore in a commercial setting. You can ignore the low hanging fruit, and so
Yeah.
not the low hanging fruit, but the less kind of, okay, that is not that important, so you can prioritize. But in a healthcare setting, you can't say I'm prioritizing the health just because my data is built on a
Yeah.
particular sample.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it becomes even more important that in a healthcare setting, you've got no option, but you have to treat them equally and detect cancers and whatnot at the right time for everybody.
For everybody. Yeah. And that next question, so it starts to bring in, and you mentioned the GDPR in your previous response, but with the rise of data privacy regulations like the GDPR and the AI framework recently,
Yeah.
how do businesses navigate the complexities of monetizing their data while remaining compliant with the regulations? Are there specific compliance frameworks or best practices that you would recommend? Safe ground for companies to begin with.
Look, I mean, I sit on various boards, as you said in my introduction, and regulatory environment is becoming tougher and tougher and stringent and stricter for most industry sectors. Good thing or bad thing, not there to debate today. But all I will say is we have to stick. I mean, consumer duty, for example,
Yeah.
let's take that example. It's another regulatory environment, and some companies have taken it as a tick box exercise, saying, "Okay, fine. Oh, I have to do this." Another thing on the back of me, sort of they're sidelined it, just got it done, so that we have to submit it. That's not the right way. I think when we did consumer duty in one of the organizations I'm associated with, it was very much, does it fundamentally change any process that needs to change? And surprise, surprise, some of the fundamental processes on the lines of consumer duty had to change. And it was not a tick box exercise where we had to go away and just submit it. There's a new regulation. Study that regulation, look at your business processes, fundamentally see if your business processes are aligned to that regulation or not, and change accordingly. Because that change is not just to meet that regulation, that change will also do you good in the future, because more and more regulation of that kind is coming, and that change is for the benefit of the consumer, which is kind of one of the most important things. So that's what I'll say, Robin, about any regulation. Work within the constraints of any regulation. Sometimes regulation can be restrictive, or certainly feels like it. But if you look at inside some of the regulations, there might be a very important fundamental change for your organization.
Okay. We're getting close to the end now, sir, and this has been an absolute masterclass. Thank you so much. The second to last question, and we'll always have the same two questions. So this one's, I'm going to ask you to put those future goggles on for a wee minute. We've come a long way as an industry in the last 20 years. What progress around data creating businesses do you see happening in the next 20 years?
I'll be boring and I'll say, Robin, that data will create more businesses. As I said, in the last 20 years, I gave the example of Google and Facebook and said 2002, Google had AdWords model. So it only created its business in 2002, you can argue.
Yeah.
Facebook only created its business in 2007, you can argue. Netflix, even more so. I think 2013 was Netflix. So if you look at the last 20, and these are the world's biggest businesses, by the way. So if you look at the last 20 years, world's biggest businesses have been created by data. Now, the next 20 years, I think not just the biggest businesses, I think fundamentally data will create more and more businesses at every level, at an SME level and at a micro SME, at a medium SME, at a whole level. The other change I also see happening is more and more CTOs, CIOs, CDOs of today becoming CEOs. So So that I see. I mean, finance, traditionally it has been the finance directors, the CFOs becoming and taking on that mantle. If you look at the top 20 companies, I think when I last did the survey, 7 out of the 8 companies were led by people with technology background. You only have to look at Bill Gates and Tim Cook and Satya Nadella, and you only have to look around and see who's guiding Apple, who's guiding Microsoft, who's guiding Facebook, and Amazon. And
Back
say,
to
fine.
Your point earlier about the importance of that chief data officer being a business leader. It's a natural progression for a business leader to assume
Absolutely.
overall.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think those two, I don't say, I mean, people talk about Gen AI and stuff like that. I'm not much into all those things will evolve. I don't want to, I want to focus more on the business. What will the outcome be? And the outcome will be more business will be created out of that. The outcome will be more technology people will serve as senior business leaders leading the businesses. Obviously, the third outcome, again, talking about Gen AI, not particularly the technology, but what excites me is very few technologies were there where the usage was universal. So the last, I believe, was search. When Google invented search, everybody started using it. So not just the technology and the data guys were excited, but the whole world was excited. So that's search, and then became social network. Same concept, not just the technologies, but the whole world got excited. Now with Gen AI and with ChatGPT and stuff like that, we are seeing a similar trend. Not just the technologists are excited, but the whole world is using it. They're getting excited. They're increasing their productivity. So I see that as a fundamental change to the way humankind works, because we never did search. Now we can't live without search.
Yeah, yeah,
We can't live without social media, and it will come a point where we can't live without ChatGPT or an iteration of Gen AI
yeah.
in various shape or form.
The guilty is charged on all
Yeah.
three counts. Sameer, final question. We always conclude each episode with a trip in the Wayback Machine. If we could talk to Sameer from 20 years ago, based on what you now know about data creating business, what would you say to yourself?
I think from my career, I wasn't aspirational enough. I couldn't see the vision. I got into operational mentality a lot of times, saying, okay, data can achieve this small functional improvement and data can impact there. I never sat back and realized the value that it can bring to the organization. Again, data created businesses, obviously you have to have a certain level of seniority, experience. You have to interact and be with other visionary guys to understand and start thinking in that way. But for your listeners today, I would say is, don't bucket and pocket yourself, and don't box yourself in one stream of work that you're doing. Always think about the business first. Again, not just the business leadership, but think about outcome. How does data improve the business outcome? Is there something that you can fundamentally change within data? How can it be universally adopted? So I would say be more aspirational, think more broad, and really don't box yourself. I think that's what I've done. I've always boxed. When I was a risk analyst, I thought, how can I reduce bad debt? Because that was the main objective. When I was a business analyst, saying, oh, okay, how can I write better business stories? And how can I use data in that? So I always boxed myself. You box yourself in the role you are playing. And the data scientist of today and the whole data science term is a culmination of various skill set. Use that skill set as a Venn diagram, and work on that intersection of your skill set rather than just one functional area that your job description describes.
Wow, brilliant answer. Thank you so much, Sameer. Thanks again for taking the time to speak to me today. Thanks for sharing your passion, your knowledge, and your expertise. As I say, it's been
Pleasure.
an absolute masterclass. And I hope you, dear listener, have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. And if you have, please take a moment to review the show on your podcast or video platform of choice, giving us 5 stars, obviously, and share this episode with anyone you feel would benefit from a view or a listen. Thanks. Please do look out for the other episodes in this podcast series where I'm joined by other special guests discussing topics relevant to today's bosses in data. Sameer, I should have asked, sir, sorry, if somebody wanted some more of your pearls of wisdom, sir, what's the best way of getting a hold of you?
Well, you can get in touch with me on on LinkedIn, which is one of the best places. My email is sameer@datamonet.co.uk. You can get in touch with me on my email or on my LinkedIn account. Very happy to assist, mentor, guide, and also learn from you.
Brilliant. Thank you again. Visit www.mbn Solutions for resources like our UK data salary survey, to watch recordings of our latest data meetup events, or to download our white papers, research and thought leadership. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter for the latest news, views, opinions and, of course, hottest opportunities in the data space. Thank you and goodbye.